Your next news update, 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Any government school librarians listening, you may want to perk your ears up. Do you have Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation on the bookshelves for the kids? Because if you don't, please get it.
Is it going to be a bestseller, Dan?
Sophie Lewis's latest, she's some sort of rather insignificant but representative, feminist LGBTQ2S IA plus purported academic. Let me just offer you a little bit of the journey you'll take.
Oh, okay. I'd like to know.
In Abolish the Family.
Wow.
Anchored in a strikingly hopeful feminist Marxism, Lewis leads the reader through a systematic, didactic introduction, my favorite kind of introduction.
I love didactic.
To the politics and possibilities of cutting ourselves loose from the constraints and impositions of the traditional patriarchal capitalist family. Finally, where do I buy a ticket? Here's Sophie Lewis providing a little bit more color on the need to abolish the family post haste.
The fear that comes with the suggestion of sort of sexual threat to children, the weaponization of the sexual innocence of the child, is something that back then in the early 80s and still today, we do not have a brave, united kind of left response to, right? So when someone gets called a groomer in this weaponized, organized way, the template for which was laid by Anita Bryant in the 80s and the sort of Reaganite campaign of organized homophobia and sort of, Christian evangelical capitalism on steroids, well, we lose an enormous amount of movement memory about where the location of sexual violence actually is in the world, right? And in the fabric of capitalist social reproduction. Where the threat to children actually is the private patriarchal nuclear household, right? And when we sort of capitulate to the sorts of moves that make a kind of threat and a social, terror out of the figure of the queer person, we throw out this enormous and indispensable component of utopian wisdom.
What was? Can you translate that?
Yeah, I mean,
please?
she's such a deep thinker. Oh, it's just so heady and dense, isn't it? No, not really. Let me translate that for you. Stop being so timid when it comes to sexualizing children. Children are just little adults.
We embrace it.
So, don't let this groomer appellation in any way deter you. And, the good news for Sophie Lewis and her fellow travelers is it's not. Like, for example, over at Nickelodeon, where a transvestite, a man dressed up as a woman, has a little ditty about the pride flag.
Doesn't it just fill you with pride, showing who you are on the inside? Wave that pride flag up high, true to you. Show your pride, wave those flags, everybody. Here we go. Red like orange, healing yellow is sunlight. Green, nature blue, harmony, purple is spirit. Baby blue, pink, white represent transgender people, and black and brown represent the queer and trans people of color.
Come on, one more time, everybody. No?
I didn't know what that meant. No.
I wrote recently a commentary for my little counterculture podcast about Pride Month going before the fall. We fly our flags, we post our yard signs demanding kindness or else. We parade around our graffitied streets enjoying the local Village People impersonators simulate sex acts for the kids, perhaps even on the kids. We attend retrospectives of Robert Mapplethorpe's groundbreaking artistry to remind ourselves how far we've come since the bad old days when some people didn't think taking pictures of a naked dude with a bullwhip up his anus was worthy of a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts. Can you believe we were ever so bigoted, hard-hearted, parsimonious, mean-spirited, hateful, ignorant, intolerant, and exclusionary? Well, no, of course not. That's why we have June, the bacchanal of love, inclusion, and tolerance. And just a reminder on this. And lest anybody be taken aback by my tone, I'm not conciliatory enough. By the way, the caricature is not mine, it's theirs. And I'm talking about the Sophie Lewises of the world and the LGBTQIA2S plus ideologues and apparatchiks who basically treat people as one-dimensional human beings. Your value is who you sleep with, how you express your sexuality and gender identity, and nothing else. What a way to diminish another human being. But anybody who doesn't wave the flag in response to these antics is the hateful one? No, I don't think so. And to the extent that this is all, oh, it's just this, it's just that, it's just another holiday celebration of inclusion and so on and so forth. Again, it's a political movement. Can't stress it enough. It's been afoot for at least 100 years. Frankfurt School. People talk a lot about, to some extent, about Freud and Marcuse, Foucault, but Wilhelm Reich. I mean, just Wilhelm Reich's writings back, who is, by the way, Freud's prize student, psychiatrist. He's the one who termed the coin sexual revolution 4 decades before the hippies were calling for it at Woodstock. He is the one that knew and expressed that the advance of Marxism began with atheism. The church had to be destroyed. Reich said Christianity only survives through tradition being passed down from one generation to the next through the family, which is why Marxists everywhere and always target the family first, just like you heard from Sophie Lewis. They still do. Why? Because it works. A friend of mine, Doug Johnson, who's the editor of Touchstone magazine, wrote about Reich. Reich correctly surmised that the way to knock the props out from underneath the American family would be to condition Western man to see contraception, fornication, adultery, pornography, sodomy, etc. as perfectly normal and not unhealthy things. And he saw sex education in schools as the best way to divest parents of their moral authority. The late Italian philosopher Augusto Del Noce described Reich's book, The Sexual Revolution, as, quote, the Mein Kampf of permissivism. How's that for a book jacket blurb? And so that's where we're at. 100 years later, that's where we're at. People have no appreciation for how ideologically motivated and politically driven is all the drivel you repeat to yourselves and the symbolism you post on your social media and outside your home and the parades you attend. It's all very innocent, isn't it? Actually, it's not. And if you knew anything or had the courage to share any information with your neighbor, maybe there'd be less of it and more sense afoot in the West. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined by John Waters, Irish thinker, talker, writer. His Substack, John Waters Unchained. John Waters, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hello, Dan. How are you? Thanks very much.
So in your piece, The Pride Reich, Writing for a Fall, you invoke, this is a good one because it's apropos, you invoke Havel's, Václav Havel's famous sort of green grocer metaphor. And why don't you recount that for us and how it applies to the modern context?
Yeah, well, Havel was writing in his essay in 1978, The Power of the Powerless. this was at the height of the darkness, as it were, in Czechoslovakia after the 68 uprising had been quashed by the Soviet tanks. And the revolution that eventually culminated in the year in 1989 was in its early stages, and he was talking about how the regime, the communist regime, maintained order and maintained obedience. And he used this example of the greengrocer who had put a notice among the vegetables in his window, and the notice said, "Workers of the world unite." And Havel said, of course, look, the greengrocer doesn't believe in this sentiment. He doesn't want anything to do with this. He thinks it's nonsense, and so on and so on. But he does it as a gesture of obedience. But Havel's point was that in order for this that because of this, that other people, the neighbours, passers-by, the shop across the road, they're all affected by this, and that the way to actually counteract this process was to just take the notice away and live with the consequences. In other words, that was the power of the powerless. But he was making the point, and you see this I can see it every June now. June, which used to be such in our childhood, used to be a beautiful month now, has been turned into a month that represents filth in our societies. Notwithstanding that they've stolen the rainbow to paint over the filth, it's still filth. And that we're here every month now. We have to suffer this for a month, listening to this gibberish all the time. Not, just from, what you might call impotent homosexuals making noise on their own behalf, but the entire establishment of our society is being taken over by it. The media of our society is being taken over by it. The police cars going around with rainbows painted on them all the time. How did this happen? And in the essay I asked this question because, as a young man, a teenager and a young man in my 20s, I was, I was somewhat left inclined, and I was interested in politics and wanted to be involved in issues. And at that time, way back in the 70s, early 80s, C&D, the campaign for nuclear disarmament, was that, being at the height of the Cold War, was quite a significant organization. And myself and a friend started a group of this in our own town, and tried to build it and tried to, get publicity. And so it was the devil's own job to get anybody to be even interested, the idea of going to, a business and asking for sponsorship would have been absurd, to go to the police and say, would you mind putting C&D on the doors of your car? We would like you to do that because it's a very good cause and it's about nuclear disarmament and so on. They would say, get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
So the important thing is to understand that none of this is organic. This did not happen. This was not a spontaneous eruption of affection for homosexuals. Let's rule that out from the very start. That there's something else going on here. When you have all this corporate effort going in to bullying, it's an exercise, an annual exercise. Pride is an exercise in bullying, a bullying of the public, and the imposition on the public mind of the idea that if you dissent from this, then you're the only one, pretty much. You're alone. You're isolated, and rightly so. You lack, compassion. You lack enlightenment. You lack tolerance. When in fact, if you speak privately to people, everybody you meet virtually now is disgusted by it. And disgusted by what it represents, the things that have erupted in our lives, particularly in the last decade. The trans horror show, where children are being deliberately maimed by an infrastructure which involves science and medicine, and so at the highest levels in our societies, where children are being maimed for life and perhaps being rendered suicidal on account of this ideology. And when you see drag queen story hours, in our libraries and so on, where you have hairy-arse men with little children on their knees, reading them, and making innuendos to them. And the parents having to smile, fixedly as they watch this, lest they be called homophobes. This bullying has to stop, really, and it can stop if we would just simply begin together, as Havel says, to take that sign out of the window, to actually utter the words, look, I dissent from this.
What
I
what
refuse to do this.
what's going on in Ireland now? Because I know there was that movement afoot to alter the constitution that failed a few months back. That was along the lines of all of this social engineering, this cultural Marxism. But
Yes.
is that pushback being sustained?
Not especially, Dan. I have to say. I mean, we've had a couple of elections since then, local elections and also European Parliament elections. And I myself went as a candidate for the European Parliament, rather, speculatively, in order to test this temperature, because on March the 8th there were two referendums voted upon on the same day, and they were both related to family affairs. The mother in the home was one, then the definition of family, whether it should be about marriage or whether it should include other kinds of relationships and other kinds of permanent. I forget the word now, but there was a word like that. So I can come back to you in a moment. In which it was really pointing very clearly to the idea of mass inward migration, and it was like stable relationships, that kind of thing. In other words, that if you had your next door neighbour and you had a good relationship, well, you could make a constitutional case that he should be brought to Ireland with you, and you'd be entitled to bring him with you as somebody who you were attached to, and so on. All this was rejected, 75 to 25 approximately. Even though the media was all on the other side, even though the media up to the day before the referendum were predicting a yes victory, it was a decisive no. And of course, we then thought that this might translate into a broader understanding. Unfortunately, that didn't materialize in the elections that I spoke about, the local elections and the European elections. So we're back into ambiguity as to what the public mindset is about. And you see, in all of these contexts, Dan, we've been dealing with something for the last decade or more, which I call mutism, this is what one of the core things the LGBT goons did from the very beginning, which was that it silenced people and made them afraid to speak, and made them thereafter afraid even to think, lest their thoughts might show on their faces. And that when they leave their house and they speak even to close neighbours or whatever, friends, they are very circumspect as to what they say, because you might just say, well, you might get the interruption. What do you mean by that? That's a very homophobic thing to say, or that's a very racist thing to say. In other words, for the first time in probably the most argumentative and garrulous population in the world, the Irish, we were told we will actually acquiesce in our own gagging, it's very sinister, all of this stuff, obviously. But if you look at the connections, you look about the way the corporations have become involved in this, you look at the way the authorities, you look at the way judges now seem to take it as a matter of course that, like, for example, like a police car painted in rainbow colours. Imagine if you are threatened by a gang of, LGBT warriors, as I was actually some years ago. There was a series of tweets going up all over the place on Twitter saying, if you see, this was after the referendum we had here, where I questioned it and then went against certain propositions that were being put forward, because they were basically sledgehammering the Irish Constitution in order to put in gay marriage into the very centre of the meaning of marriage. And I disputed this I said, well, create your own marriage called gay marriage by all means, but leave marriage as it is. And of course, so anyway, there was this campaign which was hashtag, if you see John Waters, give him a punch from me, right? and so I gathered up all of these tweets and I went to my local police station just for the heck of it, to see what would happen. And I filed a complaint, and several months passed by and nothing happened. And then two police officers in plain clothes came to my house and sat down and drank their tea, and they said, oh, very sorry, John, we're 100% behind you, or you're pushing an open door here, but, the law hasn't caught up on this form of harassment. But actually, strangely enough, if you get embroiled in an argument with an LGBT activist on the street and the police arrive with their rainbow coloured car, you know what's going to happen then. They're going to arrest you and they're not going to arrest the other guys, you know. So, in other words, what we're seeing is the enactment of a two-tier society in which certain categories are protected and defended by the state and its institutions, and others are villainized as a result of being in dispute or disagreement with the people who are preferred. And that's what we've come to now, a two-tier society in Ireland and I guess in every other country as well in the West.
John Waters, Irish thinker, talker, and writer, his Substack, John Waters Unchained. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Ben. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Fat Beach Day, or Fat Beach Day, or